We talked about the meaning of Christ's resurrection last time. His first was that it vindicated Christ's claim that he was the Son of God. You remember we had in a gospel reading recently the Jews asking him for a sign, and Jesus saying that he was going to give them the sign of it was the sign of Jonah. And then you had the question about the sign of Jonah, since Jesus says,
3 days and 3 nights.
Yeah, Matthew 12:40, as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the bosom of the earth, or something like that, for 3 days and 3 nights. And your question is, he wasn't really there for 3 nights. He was there for 3 partial days, and we can understand how it was days, but why does Jesus say 3 days and 3 nights? And I have started looking into that, and I'm not entirely satisfied with what I've found so far, so I'm going to do more looking into that. But the answer that I found so far is that it's a Jewish idiom that they say days and nights sort of as being equivalent to days sometimes, but the 2 cases that the commentator said are examples of this, I looked them up, and I don't think that they are clearly examples of that. So I'm still looking into that for you, but I haven't forgotten. Oh yes, and that's right. We had Reverend Rockham in here last week, which is why we can't remember exactly where we were and why it seems like a long time ago. All right. And then, so the first thing that his resurrection accomplishes is it's the ultimate proof that he is in fact the Son of God, because he claimed to be the Son of God, and he was put to death for making these audacious claims about himself, and then God raised him from the dead. So this is God saying, actually vindicating those claims and saying, no, he should not have been put to death for that. He's actually speaking the truth. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And then the second one, he says, Christ died for our sins. When the Father raises Christ from the dead, that is officially vindicating Christ, not only as his Son, but as the one who was innocent in himself and therefore fit to bear the sufferings, or fit to bear the sins of the world and suffer on our account. So when he raises Christ from the dead, this is also his raising us from the dead. This is his vindication of the world in Christ, that Christ didn't die for his own sins, but that he died for our sins, that this was an offering, this was a sacrifice, and the sacrifice has been received. And so raising Christ from the dead is part of the objective justification, the declaration that God makes concerning the whole world, that in Christ he is reconciled to the whole world, and he does not hold their sins against them, which then which is then what we believe when we are justified personally. And then the third, if we didn't get to the third, to that last paragraph before the 40 days, and we didn't get to his third point under the meaning of Christ's resurrection. So, Jim, would you read for us that little paragraph 3?
The resurrection of Christ proves that there is a resurrection of the dead, and that for believers there is resurrection to eternal life. Christ raised himself from death. Therefore, he has the power to raise us from death and to give us eternal life.
Okay, so this is, he's appealing to what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. If you guys say that if you guys say that there is no resurrection from the dead, then Christ wasn't raised from the dead either. Well, it works the other way around too. If Christ was not raised from the dead, then why would we think that we would be? So when you have this doctrine in particular has been assaulted in modern times by liberal theologians, people who are trying to make Christianity conform more to the canons of the world and to reason as they understand it. And you get this stuff like that Jesus, when the Bible says Jesus rose from the dead, it doesn't mean he literally stood up again. which is what the word means etymologically. It doesn't actually mean that his soul came back to his body and it lived again, but it means that he rose from the dead in that his death wasn't in vain. He rose from the dead in the hearts and minds of his followers. They were inspired by his example to live like he had lived, and their lives became like as if he had come back from the dead. And all kinds of, totally metaphorical nonsense like that. And, if that's the truth, then what do we have to look forward to in terms of our own resurrection? If even he didn't actually rise from the dead, then why would we think that we would? And people who take that kind of approach to it, saying, obviously his body didn't get up again because we know that doesn't happen. Well, then your body's not going to get up again either. And the only kind of immortality you can look forward to would be an immortality of the soul, going on and on without the body forever. And I imagine most of them do take some solace in that hope. But it's ridiculous to say we know that this doesn't happen, therefore it never happened, when God is involved. If Jesus is actually God, and if the power of God can do anything, then to say just categorically that the dead cannot rise, well, that's nonsense. Can God do anything, or can't he? Is he the one who gave life to the human body in the first place, or isn't he? And so his resurrection and our resurrection are totally intertwined. And that is, it took him till point 3 to get to it. But that is very, that is the hope of Easter for us. That is why Easter is a wonderful day. Because we are baptized into Christ, and St. Paul says that if we have died with him, we will surely live with him. Mike?
Is there any indication that the Pharisees or the Sadducees or Pontius Pilate knew anything about his rising or coming back?
Well, the Gospels tell us that the Roman soldiers who'd been guarding the tomb came and told the leaders of the Jews that the angel had come and rolled the stone away. And they didn't actually testify that they had seen anybody come out of the grave, but it's a pretty big coincidence if that happens and then the grave is empty. And the response of the authorities was, tell the people that his disciples came and stole his body, which is purposeful deception on their part. They're saying, well, I don't know why the Roman soldiers would make up something like this, but I can't believe it. So we're just going to have to get something else out there, some kind of damage control. So according to the Gospels, they did know, or they should have known, that if disciples had stolen the body, the disciples were of an angelic nature and not of a human nature. Either that or the Romans had suffered some kind of mass hallucination, and if they were bound and determined not to believe that the one they had put to death was the Son of God, and you have to agree that they had plenty of vested interest in not believing that, then, they might have just said, who cares what Romans say? Bunch of pagans, they were probably drinking.
When we had Paul Maier here, he was talking about that, and he said that those soldiers were probably not Roman soldiers. They were probably the Pharisees or the soldiers of the temple. Because when Pilate, when he says, take your soul, or go get soldiers or something, he doesn't say they're Roman soldiers.
That's a good point.
But so that's even more convincing, because he said they were probably the soldiers of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, temple guards or whatever they are.
Yeah. So they either had to impeach the testimony of multiple men who they should have been able to trust if they were in their own employ, which isn't a terribly honest thing to do just because you don't like their testimony. Or they had to believe the testimony and still spread a lie about it. So they knew, and they suppressed that knowledge. They knew that something had happened that was a lot more dramatic than just the disciples somehow getting in there past the guards and stealing the body. And what Pilate knew, I don't know. We don't see anything more about Pilate after he condemns Jesus to death. But we know that his wife tells him, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things on his account in a dream. So his wife was impressed by Jesus. She'd had a dream that she thought Pilate should have nothing to do with it. So when they heard that the tomb was empty, it's interesting to imagine what their thoughts might have been.
The Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, but did they believe in any kind of eternal life? And if not, was the only reason they were so strict with God's law just for temporal blessing then? Or?
My understanding of the Sadducees, let me see. Yeah, I know they didn't believe in a resurrection of the body. And they didn't believe in, like, they thought that angels having these sort of spirits between God and man, they thought that was a pagan corruption, sort of like demigods. I don't know. I'd have to look into it, whether they believed in some kind of a spiritual afterlife. But that sounds like that would be a Greek idea. Like, they would associate that, like they would throw that in the same category with angels and say that, you know, that's an idea of the pagans that we shouldn't be allowing into our religion. But that's just a guess. Definitely the physical resurrection they denied. So Christ's resurrection proves his claims to divinity, proves that his sacrifice has been received by the Father on behalf of the whole world, and proves that there is a life after death for us too, for all those who are baptized into him.
I don't know if you're ready to go on, but the question I have here is, you were talking earlier, the Father raised Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here, the author here says that Jesus raised himself.
Right. Yeah, I did notice that.
Jesus says, I and the Father are one, which would possibly explain all that, but he talks about laying his life down. He's able to lay his life down and pick it up again.
I think that's the reference he's pointing to. I'm looking it up right now. John 2:19. No, he's pointing to destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up, which is equally good. But then, you know, St. Paul, and I don't remember where this reference is, but St. Paul, talking to the Christian, says, if the spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in your hearts, then... And so that sounds like he's attributing it to the Father. But when you're dealing with the Trinity, you know, what the Trinity does is the whole Trinity is always involved in what it does. And, you know, the Spirit is the giver of life. The Spirit is what God used to give life to Adam and Eve in the first place in the garden. The Lord, the giver of life. And so he had to be involved in the resuscitation of Jesus' body too. I think that's just a case where Jesus says, I am going to do this. He's speaking as God, rather than as distinctly the Son.
Go back to I am.
Yeah, right. Before Abraham was, I am. And Jerusalem, how often would I have, you know, comforted you under my wings, like a mother hen, talking about their whole history. Because he is the image of the invisible God, right? He can speak in the first person for the Father. He is the Father's revelation to the world.
Well, did not the Father also say, I will provide myself a lamb? Or he will provide himself a lamb?
Yeah, well, I think you're thinking of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham says to Isaac, God himself will provide the lamb.
Or God will provide himself a lamb.
Yeah. So, right, that does suggest that God, in that sense, should be particularly understood as the Father, since the Lamb is particularly understood as Christ when you apply it.
Right, but being the Father, he's providing also himself.
I think that means for himself. In that case, he will provide himself a lamb, sort of like, I'm gonna get me a ice cream cone, or I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind. I think it means provide for himself. And Yeah, if we looked at the grammar, we'd be able to figure that out because it would be a different case, a different marker. But I don't have the Hebrew here at the moment, and it might take me a little longer than I want to do on camera to figure that out anyway. Mike.
When they condemn Jesus, I mean, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, are they like one and the same? Or are they like in a council, or
They're in a council.
So that both of them are guilty? I mean, both of them did it. I mean, it's just like one wasn't more complicit than the other. So they were like, how did they coexist together when they had such a different belief? I mean, one of them believed in an afterlife and the other one didn't. It seems like that'd be like mixing Catholics and Baptists or something.
Yeah. Well, they only had one temple, and they only had one high priest, and so they kind of had to coexist to that extent. The Pharisees were largely in control of the synagogues, especially outside of Israel, like in the diaspora. The Pharisees were, but the Sadducees were in charge of the temple.
So what was Caiaphas? Was he a Sadducee or a Pharisee?
The high priestly family were Sadducees.
They were always Sadducees?
They were at that time. And so the Pharisees had to work with the Sadducees just because they were using the same temple and they recognized the same high priest. But when the temple was destroyed, a generation or two after Jesus' death, AD 70, when the temple is destroyed, the Sadducees kind of peter out pretty quickly because they don't have the temple establishment anymore. And the Pharisees, they thrive on the decentralized sort of synagogue thing where the whole practice of the religion is the observance of the law, the personal observance of the law, personal holiness and all that. And so the Pharisees get to define Judaism after Christ, not the Sadducees. But yeah, it's sort of a coalition government, the Sanhedrin at the time. All right, so let's go on to the 40 days. Shirley, would you read the next paragraph?
During the 40 days following his resurrection, excuse me, Christ did not live and travel with his disciples as he had done throughout the 3 previous years. He speaks of that time as, while I was still with you. But Jesus repeatedly appeared to them at different times and in different places to convince them of the fact of the resurrection. He also explained the scriptures to them and gave them further instruction concerning the kingdom of God and their mission on earth.
Right. The 40 days is this sort of in-between period where he has not yet showed them his ascension. He has not yet gone away into heaven in such a way that they feel like, okay, we're the guys now. We're the ones who are left. We are the body of Christ on earth to carry out his work on earth. But he's not with them constantly like he was before the crucifixion either. He's sort of getting them used to the idea that he's going to be with them, but he's not always going to be with them physically in a way that they can see. So when he just pops up, and the stories of this 40-day period, that's what it's like. He just pops up, and then he pops away. It seems you don't have segues. They're out fishing, and suddenly he's there on the shore preparing breakfast for them. They're in the upper room, and suddenly he's among them, and he says, "Peace be unto you." These, I think these are supposed to get them used to thinking that even though I can't see him, he is with me anyway. At any moment, I could see him. At any moment, he could be with us just like he was before. He's gone, but he's not dead. And the reason he has gone on is because he has risen to new life beyond the confines of this life, and he has gone on to prepare a place for us. He has gone on to be the hope that we are now to spread to the nations, that we also can be forgiven of our sins, and we also can share his eternal life in heaven.
It's interesting, I haven't really thought about before, this coming and going, but when he does leave to not come back, he makes it very purposeful, and
Yeah.
in the Ascension,
Right.
and the angels say, as you saw him leave, you're gonna see him come back. It talks about judgment day.
Right. And he does, elsewhere in the New Testament, he does manifest himself still after his ascension. Not, well, yeah, even physically in the book of Revelation, the Apostle John, the vision that opens the book of Revelation, he has a vision of Jesus, only glorified and in heaven, maybe hard to recognize a little bit at that point, except for the wounds. But he does have a vision of him. And St. Paul, when St. Paul's on the road to Damascus, and Jesus at least speaks to him from heaven, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. So it's not like he stops all communication with the earth, but he stops appearing and having these throwback moments where he's sitting with them, talking with them, interacting back and forth the way it used to be. All this to prepare them for the ascension and the sending of the Holy Spirit, because they have a big job to do. They have a big job to do. They're going to be sent out rather than it just being one cadre of Jesus going around with a bunch of disciples. They're going to be sent out, and all the training that he put them through, and he continues to put them through, and he appears to them during the 40 days, is now going to come into use. So Christ's ascension, Linda, would you read us that paragraph?
The disciples witnessed in part the ascension of Christ from the Mount of Olives. Luke records, while they washed, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. Although Jesus withdrew his visible presence from his disciples, he promised to be with them until the end of the world. Christ's human nature, therefore, is not limited somewhere to a definite, circumscribed place, because he ascended far above all the heavens that he might fill all things. Consequently, in both his divine and human natures, Christ is still with us everywhere. When he finished his work on earth, Christ triumphantly returned as the victor over sin and hell into the glory of his Father. Heaven is not a limited space in or part of the created physical world. It is the Father's house in which there are many mansions. That is where Christ has gone to prepare a place for us and where we will be with him. Heaven is the right hand of the majesty of God.
So this is obviously plugging back into the conversation we had a little while ago about the majestic genus, about the way that Jesus' body after the resurrection and after his glorification is not confined to heaven and confined to the same constraints that bodies are normally, which is the principle that the Calvinists invoke when they deny the possibility of the real presence in the sacrament, that he could actually be on our altar and on somebody else's altar at the same time. And so if Jesus ascended into heaven and his presence at the right hand of God doesn't mean that there's a body tucked away somewhere in space, then by extension, our resurrection does not necessarily mean that either. In our resurrection, we are not necessarily going to be tucked away someplace in heaven either, but we're going to be with God in a similar way to how Jesus is with God in the resurrection. Although it does say that there will be a new heavens and a new earth, and I've wondered if that means that there will be, both the heavenly experience and the earthly experience at the same time. Almost if we can go back and forth between modes or something like that in the heavenly state. But that's
Wouldn't that just be the fact that the body and the spirit are united, so that your body would experience things in heaven? The heaven, what you just said about a new earth. Mm-hmm. I always thought that just meant that the body and the spirit were reunited in heaven. So you've got a bodily experience as well as a spiritual experience.
Well, it certainly does mean that, but in the context of that is the destruction of the old world. Since the old world has been destroyed, there needs to be a new world, and it's plugging into Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You know, they're put together there too.
But all the heavens could be the celestial heavens as well.
Yeah, right. You know, like the parts of the heavens that are actually physical universe. Right, and that might be all that's meant there, that the heavens and the earth that were created in Genesis 1 are being recreated, and so both halves might be intended to be physical in Revelation also. But the earth half certainly is, whatever we say about the heaven half. So there will be a new physical cosmos, and presumably, since we believe in the bodily resurrection, there's a new physically cosmos because we are resurrected bodily, and that there will be a physical experience going forward for eternity.
If we go back to Genesis 1, Adam and Eve were in perfection, lived in the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we're not looking at a disembodied future, but we are looking at resurrection bodies that are spiritual, that is, that are not limited by all the constraints of these bodies. And so what we believe about Jesus' resurrection is connected also to what we believe about our own future resurrection, because his resurrection is our resurrection. We rise in him. Gordon.
Jesus says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am also.
Mm-hmm.
So he is physically present here, now. We just can't see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the point that he's making here. Where does he say that? He promised to be with them until the end of the world. So Christ's human nature is not limited somewhere to a definite circumscribed place. And then he quotes this Ephesians 4. He ascended far above all the heavens that he might fill all things. So I want to look at that. I want to look at that passage so you can see, or I'll read it to you anyway. Ephesians 4, and I'll back up a few verses, starting with verse 4. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He who descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So that is the context of saying that he ascended to fill all things. You could translate that, and some people have, that he ascended to fulfill all things, meaning that he ascended as was prophesied, so that everything that was prophesied about him would be fulfilled. But in context here, it's talking about him moving, right? It's talking about him going places. He descends and he ascends. And when it says he ascends, that presupposes that he descended in the first place. So considering that context, when he's talking about him going into places. And then also, when it says he descended, it says he descended into the lower regions of the earth. So this translation, this is the ESV that we use, but the ESV has been changed a few times since it first came out. So what I have here is not necessarily what we have in our lectionary. There are a few translational changes, and I don't know if this is one of those. But this Bible says he had descended into the lower regions, comma, the earth. So they are interpreting this as merely he descended from heaven to earth in the first place, and then he ascended back again. But what the Greek actually says is he descended into the lower regions of the earth. So they are assuming that of the earth is the kind of genitive that just sort of renames the thing. Like if we were to say the kingdom of England, or the kingdom of heaven, or I don't know if I'm going to come up with another example as good as that. The lower regions of the earth, this translation is assuming that means the lower regions, namely the earth. But normally if you have a comparative adjective in there, the lower regions, and then of the earth, it's a partitive thing. Like you say the worst, or the less strong students in the class, right? Or the less valuable investments. The least invaluable of the investments, or the most fattening of the desserts, or something like that. Usually you are talking about a subset within the thing that you have in the of. So of the earth, lower regions of the earth, the natural way to read that to me seems to be that he descended into hell, that he descended into the grave. He didn't just come in the incarnation to walk around the earth's surface, but he actually died and was buried and went to the place of the dead. And so when he ascended all the way from down there. So you actually had like a 3-level cosmos sort of sketched out in these verses. And he started up here, and he went here, and he went here, and then he came back up here so that he might fill all things. And then it really makes sense to take that as fill rather than fulfill. And Koehler's point is made there, and this is the traditional Lutheran interpretation of this verse, especially over against the Calvinists, that we're talking about an ascent into heaven, not Christ's body continues to be located and limited to one little spot of space, which is now up past Jupiter somewhere instead of down in Galilee, but rather that he ascends in a mystical way so as to fill all things, so that he is now the omnipresent man. And he can be with us as a man anywhere.
Is that the scripture reference from whence the Apostles' Creed obtains its notion of descending into hell?
It's one of them. There's also, we looked at one of the other ones a few weeks ago, and we talked about the descent into hell in 1 Peter chapter 3. That's the most explicit one. He descended and preached to the spirits who were in prison. But this is the other one, which is as close as we have to a good proof text for the descent into hell. Mike.
I've always assumed that what it meant that he went to hell in that verse there.
Yeah, the lower regions of the earth. That's why I don't like this translation. It sort of takes, by not literally giving you the Greek, it takes that option off the table for readers who are just reading the English.
The opposite of that, though, if you've got, the assumption is that God or Christ can go to heaven, hell, earth, wherever he wants to go. He's not restricted. He might not choose to go to hell very often. But the devil's restricted to hell and earth, right? He's cast out of the heaven. He has no options except for hell and earth. And when earth is destroyed, he's going to be in hell.
Job.
Yeah, in the book of Job, the devil is pictured coming to heaven to talk to God about Job.
I thought there was a chasm. He was talking across the chasm.
There are a couple possibilities here. Revelation 12 talks about the dragon fighting with Michael and his angels and being cast out of heaven. And the question is, how many times did this happen? There was the rebellion at the beginning, and usually that's associated with the rebellion at the beginning. So either he was exiled from heaven, but he can come back and make petitions from time to time, or he was cast out of heaven at the beginning, and then later on, maybe with the resurrection of Christ, he was really cast out so that he can't even go back to accuse us anymore.
Christ said that one time. He said he saw the devil fall like lightning from heaven, like a flash of lightning.
So we know he was cast out at least once. I don't know. Offhand, I can't think of any other verse to help answer the question of whether he might still have limited access like he seemed to have in the book of Job.
I've always thought that he didn't, but that's just, I don't know where I came up with.
Well, I think, that passage in Revelation suggests that, because the one who accused the brethren has been cast down, like from the place where he could accuse them. So it does. The implication does seem to be that he can't keep doing what he was doing to Job. But I would have to study that more. I'm sure it's been hashed out somewhere with a lot of references. Gordon.
There's that passage where Christ is talking to Peter, I think, and says that Satan has asked to sift you like wheat.
Right.
So that suggests that he is asking God's permission to do that.
Right.
But I don't know if that text would support that interpretation, but that's what.
So there is still some way for Satan to make these requests, or at least there was at the time.
Right.
You know, if the death and resurrection of Christ would have been the occasion of the second fall from heaven, the second time he was banned from heaven, if there was a second time. So I don't know.
I always thought that Satan was out to sift us all like wheat. That was kind of what he does. It's like a roaring lion that's out to.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that verse suggests that Peter was under some special protection. Possibly that we are all under. But maybe Satan doesn't make that request for everybody. But for Peter, he did. He wanted to make Peter a special case.
All of our petitions reach God, so maybe the devil still has that communication line, not that he actually visits heaven,
Right.
but that he can communicate with God.
Yeah.
Or could.
I don't know.
Well, but our communication is intercession with Christ.
Yes.
I don't suppose that the devil has been invited to be a part of that intercession.
He certainly doesn't pray in the same way that we do.
He's already been judged. I mean, the devil and the demons have been judged and cast out. I mean,
Yeah.
They're not going to be in the last judgment day. I mean, they've already been judged.
Right. Yeah, the last judgment is the souls of the dead.
I always thought that's why they're so frustrated, because they've already been judged, and that's why they're running around doing what they do.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it just a little bit, it's an interesting study in the nature of evil. You know, it's like that there's no hope and there's no future in anything that they do, but spite is enough to keep them doing it, just so that they can share their suffering. Misery loves company.
It's hard to not think of these things all in physical terms, but the lake of fire and stuff in Revelation, where is it the devil and his angels will be cast into, or they already are there?
What it says is it was prepared for the devil and his angels. I think it also tells you the moment when the devil and at least when the beast and the false prophet are cast in. I think it says the devil too. But anyway, it does definitely say it was prepared for the devil and his angels. So, yeah, they're going to be there. And, and they don't have physical bodies in the same way we do. So that suggests that, lake of fire should not be understood in a purely physical way either. Mike?
I've always thought of it this way. I don't think it's a physical torment in hell, the way we think of it, like Dante's Inferno. Mm-hmm. I think the separation of God is something that we can't comprehend, and that God uses that as a metaphor or something for us, because we can't comprehend what it's like to have the separation from God. I think we get glimpses of it in this life. I think depression, I think those are glimpses of what it's like to be separated from God. Mm-hmm. We don't have the total concept of it, but I think we can't conceive of it. And I think that the separation of God is something so horrendous that he can't even convey it to us.
Yeah, just to be walled off by your own sin from the source of all your life and happiness, the source of all your wisdom, everything that makes you who you are. There might be an actual burning sensation involved too, but
I don't think that's the purpose of it.
I'm perfectly fine with understanding lake of fire as a metaphor, just for a suffering which is going to be great, and which you don't want to go to. That's the point. You don't want to go here.
We have the story of Lazarus and the rich man. It would seem to say it is physical.
Yeah, well, it's a consistent. If it is a metaphor, it's a consistent metaphor throughout Scripture. You know that the word used for hell as a place of punishment in the New Testament is pretty consistently Gehenna, which was a trash dump outside of the city of Jerusalem, where they were always burning trash. So there was always the stench and the smoke and the heat, and it says the smoke of their torment ascends forever. Stuff like that. It's really a consistent metaphor. So it might not just be a metaphor. There might be actual fire too. But what Mike says is also a good point. That there are lots of ways. There are lots of ways to suffer if you are walled off by your own sin and rebellion from God, who is the source of all your life and all your joy. I mean, the worst sinner here on earth doesn't realize to what extent he is still in communion with God, to what extent God still upholds him and gives him all that he needs. And if God should actually take him seriously in his get out of my life and get out of his life and let him have his own way, to whatever extent God does that, the man destroys himself.
Well, did Christ not actually experience the metaphor while still on the cross?
He was separated from God.
Yeah, he experienced being abandoned by God to the suffering that was being brought upon him unjustly by men. And it had to be psychologically traumatic for him, because he was used to being supported in everything throughout his whole life. That the Father always took care of him. When he said, when he's about to ask for Lazarus to be raised from the dead, he says, I know that you will give me anything I ask. Right? He has that full and perfect faith when he prays, because he has just had this life of perfect harmony with the Father, exactly the way that we were designed to do, the way that Adam did before the fall. And now he is in the greatest need in his life that he's ever been in, and he's being left to suffer these torments. And to be mocked and jeered at by these people who are completely in the wrong themselves, but they've made it look like he's completely in the wrong.
So do you not think that he suffered more than just what was going on physically, but spiritually, the effects of the lake of fire?
I've heard that speculated, but I think it's pretty far-flung speculation. We know the crucifixion is extremely painful, and we know that the psychological element of being left to this unjust suffering, to suffer death, which is the penalty for sin, when he himself is sinless.
But he was also separated from
I think
God at that point.
I think when he says, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" what he has in mind is that he is being left to die. He's being left to die, and not only that, but the death on the tree, which the law says is the death of a man who's cursed by God, right? This has all the earmarks of he is a horrible sinner who's been faking it his whole life, and he's finally getting his just desserts, and everybody who down there who's mocking him is in the right. And actually, that's completely backwards. That is exactly the opposite of what the situation actually is. And so, but God is not stepping in and setting the record straight for him, like he would have every reason to expect.
Yeah, but part of it is that he's bearing the sins of the whole world. I mean, it's not just a physical death on the cross. I mean, he's bearing the sins of the world as he's dying. I mean, that's part of his agony.
Yeah. Well, I think the sins of the whole world are not. It's not a thing, right? It's not a thing that you could put on his back so as to cause him extra pain. He is dying for the sins of the whole world means he is dying as a sacrifice for the sins of the whole world.
I always thought he bore the sins of the whole world, that it was a burden that he was bearing on the cross.
He did bear the sins of the whole world in exactly the same way that every sin offering in the Old Testament bore the sin. But on the Day of Atonement, the priest would put his hand on the head of the sacrifice, and would put the sins of the people on the sacrifice, and then the one sacrifice would be killed, and the other sacrifice would be sent off into the wilderness away from the people, showing that their sins were being removed. But that didn't actually make the goat guilty when the sin was put on him. It didn't make the goat guilty, and I don't think we have to say it caused him psychological pain. What was happening was that the suffering, this guy was suffering for your sins instead of you suffering for your sins. And that's the sense in which he's bearing the sins. I don't think we have to say that that the sins themselves were like some kind of an acid poured into his brain or anything like that, or however you would understand that, adding extra psychic torment.
Pastor Maier used to explain it that he said like a normal person couldn't bear the sins of anybody. He couldn't bear the sins of himself, let alone somebody else. But the fact that Jesus was God gave him the ability to bear the sins on the cross of everybody before him and after him. And I've always thought of it as something that that made the suffering on the cross that much more intense, was the bearing of the sins of the whole world.
Well, he bore the sins of the world as the sin offering, as the sacrifice who was dying for it. He bore the punishment, it means. It means he bore the punishment for the sins. And so when we're talking about his being abandoned to this painful death, and the painful death itself and the psychological trauma, we are talking about the pain of bearing the sins of the world. Bearing the sins of the world, it's legal. This is legal terminology. This is forensic terminology. It doesn't mean that sins are actually some substance that was literally heaped into his soul at that point.
The sacrificial lamb, it really isn't explained in that manner very often. It's explained more like the question you were asking. Mm-hmm. And it makes more sense that he is the sacrifice, not necessarily one taking on a sin, as it were.
Yeah.
But being that sacrifice.
Yeah, it's right. It's illegal. The sacrifice dies so that you don't have to. That's how the Old Testament sacrificial system taught people to expect Christ, and to understand the Lamb of God who would take away the sins of the world. Like the scapegoat taking them away into the wilderness, away from the people of God. So, a lot of people they talk like that, but I think if you get to the bottom of what they mean by it, if you would actually press them on it and say, "Are you saying that sin is actually a substance that was poured into Jesus at this point and caused him psychic torment or something like that?" I don't think most of them would say that that's what they mean. I think what they mean is what I explained, if they would stop to think about it.
It's kind of like when we always defend ourselves, in anything. No, that wasn't my fault, Any slight, we're quick to defend ourselves and not assume that is our responsibility, with any other person. So Christ, obviously not having any of that, and then being accused of all of it, was.
And entirely having the right and the power to say, no, I'm not going to take the rap for this. And he agrees to take the rap for it anyway. I mean, he could only possibly be doing that out of love for us, because he knows that in taking this rap, he's taking our rap.
But he knew all along that that's what he was going to do, or that's what he was here for.
Right. And, it had to be a shadow over his life. And every time he experienced a little bit of physical pain, which he had never experienced before for all of eternity, I had to remind him, this is it's all of one piece. This is not going to end. This is not going to end happily. Well, okay, it will in the resurrection, but this physical experience, this pain and death that I'm experiencing right now, is just a little foretaste of what it's going to be.
Did you ever see The Passion of the Christ? Have you seen that movie yet?
Yeah, The Passion of the Christ.
There's that one part where he's flashing back to when he was learning how to do carpentry work, which I thought was interesting because it gives you a human kind of nature that you don't think of. I mean, he was thinking back to joyous moments he had in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was a good movie. I've only seen it once. might be time to watch it again.
I think at least I have anyway, tried to minimize sometimes the actual physical suffering, like, you know what I'm saying, in that, like, well, he's God, so he knew he was going to do that his whole life, he loves us, but, I mean, he felt, we sprained an ankle and we're, in agony, and praying for healing and stuff, and he's going through something so unjust, the physical. I think the Passion of the Christ actually did a pretty
I thought they did a great job of
of showing. You're just like, can this thing get over? I mean, 'cause
The guy that gets me is the guy that's the thief on there that's mocking him. I mean, I thought, what in the heck? I mean, the guy's suffering just like him, and he's mocking Christ while he's up there.
But that's evil, right? That's what evil does to you. It makes a fool of you. You're like you're in the middle of suffering yourself, and you see somebody else suffering, and you're like, well, I got to get some joy out of this, so I'm going to mock him. It's sort of like the devil. What we were just saying with the devil and the demons. But the one thief who does repent, what does he say? He says, what's wrong with you? We deserve this. He didn't do anything wrong. And I think that gets at right there the extra psychological element that makes it's not just the physical agony that Jesus is going through. There's the injustice of it. Like, this is something that even we feel this passionately, right? It's like if something happens to us, if we have to pay a fine, or worse, if we have to endure some kind of public rebuke for something that we didn't do, right? Or something that we think we are totally justified in doing, that rankles. That hurts a lot more than if we actually did do it, to suffer unjustly. And we never suffer totally unjustly. If we set the parameters of a case, we could say, in this case, I am blameless, but we can never say, I am totally blameless. Jesus was totally blameless. He was totally blameless, and he had every right to expect that God the Father would not let him suffer the penalty of death.
But he had to know he was going to die. I mean,
But he did know he was going to die, but it was totally against justice. And it was totally against the way things should have been. And it was only for the sake of our salvation.
Well, which is why he sweat blood and pleaded that if there was another way.
Right.
I think he knew. I think he knew exactly what was going to happen.
Well, he told the disciples, he told them exactly what was going to happen before they went to Jerusalem. He said he had to go there and be...
Yeah, we had one of those cases in our gospel reading for today, actually.
That doesn't necessarily make it easier. Like, well, here we go.
No, I don't think that makes it easier. I think you dread it your whole life. Probably. It probably makes it harder, actually. Who wants to know? Like, if I'm going to die in some horrible way, I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that until right before it happens.
I always think that's the thing about dogs and animals is they never have to worry about stuff like that. They don't. I mean, if they got some disease, they don't know what's going to happen to them. People are always... if they tell you got cancer or such and such or something, and maybe you got 2 weeks to live, the last 2 weeks are going to be miserable. I mean, you're going to be sitting there thinking about how it's just you worry about stuff. But I mean, I always think about animals like that. They don't think about it. I mean, they got some. I mean, the dog we got now is getting old and she's starting to fall apart, but she doesn't think about it. She thinks she's up and she's drinking water or whatever she's doing.
So to wrap this up, Jesus, I mean, as great as the physical suffering was, it wasn't only physical suffering. It was psychological suffering, and it had this very personal religious angle to it also, because he had been the one man who had ever lived in perfect harmony with God. And now that perfect harmony would dictate something should be happening right now in terms of me being rescued, and it's not happening. And so the harmony was broken in that sense. And and in the sense that hell involves being separated from God and being abandoned to your suffering, although justly, then you could say that Jesus got a little taste of hell on the cross in that abandonment that he felt from God. But I don't want to go overboard with that because some people go overboard with that. The point is that Jesus did not go to hell. Jesus was vindicated. Jesus went to hell to break out of hell. Jesus went to hell to break the power of hell. He didn't go to hell to suffer forever because he was just and he was vindicated. And if he had gone to hell to suffer forever, it would not have saved us because he had to rise again for us to be justified and for us to live forever. So I thought we were going to finish this chapter today. This happens. I guess we have Christ's session at God's right hand. We have one more page to go. We obviously can't start it now. I just want to bring up something. We have, after this page, we have one more chapter in this unit of the book. And then we have the next unit on salvation and sanctification, part 8, salvation through the means of grace. No, I guess it's part 7 first. But we've been in this book for a long time, and you might like to take a break from it and do something exegetical, something where we go through a book of the Bible and then come back to it afterwards. I think that there's a little systematic theology fatigue being experienced by some people in the Sunday school, and possibly being experienced by more than have said something to me. So I think be thinking about, probably a short book. Let's start with a short book and not the Gospel of John or the book of Genesis or, God help us, Revelation. Let's start with one of Paul's epistles maybe, or one of the general epistles. So think about that, and we'll talk about that more next time.